Napoleon's biggest mistake. In the autumn of 1807, Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte ruled over much of Europe. He had humbled Austria and Prussia, and sealed an alliance with Russia, among the major powers. Only Britain still defied him, protected from invasion by the strength of its navy. Napoleon ordered all territories under French control or allied to France to cease trade with Britain. This so-called continental system, or blockade, was designed to cripple Britain's economy and force its government to sue for peace. But neutral Portugal continued trading with its historic ally, Britain, so Napoleon dispatched an army under General Junot to occupy the country and bring it into line. This invasion was supported by France's ally, Spain, yet privately. Napoleon held the Spanish monarchy in contempt. The Bourbon royal family was decadent and corrupt. The king and crown prince loathed each other, and the country was effectively ruled by Chief Minister Manuel Godoy, the Queen's lover. Napoleon concluded that Spain was backward, militarily weak, and incompetently governed. He devised a plan to seize control of the nation in the spring of 1808. Under the pretext of protecting Spain from the British, French troops occupied strategic positions throughout the country. To the Spanish people, the presence of French troops was simply the latest in a long line of humiliations, and they blamed Chief Minister Godoy. Riots broke out at the royal palace in Aranjuez. Godoy barely escaped with his life. Napoleon invited the Spanish royal family and Godoy to take refuge in the French city of Bayonne, and sent Marshal Murat and 50,000 troops to restore order in Madrid. But on May 2, 1808, the people of Madrid rose up against Murat's soldiers. It became known as the Dos de Mayo uprising, immortalized by the artist Francisco Goya. One of his most famous scenes shows Napoleon's Mameluke guards being attacked by the citizens of Madrid. 100 French soldiers were killed. The French responded with ruthless reprisals, gunning down dozens in the streets and executing more than 100 by firing squad. Meanwhile, in Bayonne, Napoleon forced King Carlos to abdicate and handed the crown of Spain to his own brother, Joseph Bonaparte. That summer, Napoleon imposed a new constitution on Spain and had Joseph enter Madrid as the new king. The Spanish reacted with fury. The arrogant French had trampled on their national honor. They were atheists who had, during the French Revolution, rejected the Pope and desecrated the Catholic Church. To the Spanish clergy, Napoleon was the Antichrist. Revolts erupted across the country. The Spanish army was joined by militias and guerrilla fighters who ambushed French troops and killed collaborators. The French responded with brutal reprisals. Mercy was not shown. Countless atrocities horrified Francisco Goya and inspired his series The Disasters of War. At first, it seemed the French would crush the uprising with ease. Girona, Valencia, and Zaragoza were besieged by French forces, while the Spanish army of Galicia was routed by Marshal Bessières at the Battle of Medina del Rio Seco. But just 8 days later, as General Dupont and 3 French divisions withdrew from Cordoba, slowed down by wagons loaded with loot, they were surrounded at Bayonne by General Costacos and the army of Valuja, and forced to surrender. The Spanish captured 18,000 French prisoners, about half of whom would later die of starvation. Bayonne was a humiliation for France, its first major defeat since Napoleon became emperor. France's enemies across Europe rejoiced. Napoleon flew into a rage. The situation went from bad to worse. The Portuguese joined the revolt, while fierce Spanish resistance forced the French to abandon the sieges of Valencia, Girona, and Zaragoza. Spain's new king, Joseph Bonaparte, was even forced to flee the capital. Britain supported the uprising, which the Spanish now called their War of Independence, by delivering weapons via the Royal Navy. On August 1st, a small British army under Sir Arthur Wellesley landed in Portugal to support the rebellion. On August 17th, He defeated a small French force at Rolica, and 4 days later beat Junot's main army at the Battle of Vimeru. But Wellesley's new superior, Sir Hugh Dalrymple, soon agreed to repatriate Junot and his troops along with all their weapons and loot using British ships in Britain. These generous terms were seen as a disgrace and a scandal. A formal inquiry followed. Wellesley, the future Duke of Wellington, was acquitted. Dalrymple would never hold command. Again, Napoleon decided the only way to settle the situation in Spain was to go there himself. He assembled 130,000 reinforcements, including many of his best troops, and on November 7th, launched a second invasion of Spain. Most of the Spanish armies were inexperienced, poorly equipped, and badly led. Their forces lacked any coherent strategy. They were no match for the Grande Army, which crossed the Ebro River and inflicted crushing defeats on the Spanish at Burgos and Tudela at Tudela. Marshal Lannes' Third Corps avenged the earlier disaster at Bailén by routing General Costaco's army, scattering it in 2 directions. Napoleon advanced rapidly north of Madrid. 8,000 Spaniards held the mountain pass of Somosierra, impatient to reach the capital. Napoleon ordered his Polish light horse guards to charge directly at the Spanish guns. In a near-suicidal display of bravery, they stormed the artillery head-on, clearing the way for the French. 4 days later, under threat of destruction, Madrid opened its gates to Napoleon's army. Unbeknownst to him, however, a force of 20,000 British soldiers under Sir John Moore had just arrived in Salamanca after a grueling 300-mile march from Lisbon with another small force en route from Coruña. Although inexperienced, the British army was well-trained, well-organized, and well-led unlike most Spanish forces. When Moore heard of Spain's collapse, he devised a bold plan to distract the French by attacking Marshal Soult's isolated Second Corps and threatening Napoleon's lines of communication with Burgos and Fr. and stood at Sagan on December 21st. The British 15th Hussars advanced overnight through winter frost and launched a dawn charge against a French cavalry brigade, routing it in a thunderous attack. But as Moore prepared a full assault on Soult, he learned that Napoleon himself was advancing rapidly toward him from Madrid with the main French army, while 2 French corps under Marshal Lannes began a second brutal siege of Zaragoza. Napoleon saw an opportunity to trap the British. He aimed to catch Moore between his own forces and Soult's Second Corps. His troops marched over the frozen Guadarrama, passed through a snowstorm. Facing odds of more than 2-1. Moore immediately ordered a retreat, a 250-mile march to the coast, where his army could be evacuated by the Royal Navy for both sides. It became a desperate race to the see-through mountains, mud, and freezing cold. Many collapsed along the road. British discipline broke down, leading to looting and drunkenness except among the rearguard, who fought several skillful delaying actions to hold off the French. The elite 95th Rifles stood out in these skirmishes. This specialist light infantry regiment wore green uniforms for a better camouflage, and was among the few units equipped with rifles. Unlike standard muskets, rifles had spiral grooves inside the barrel that spun the bullet for greater accuracy, though they were slower to reload. In one legendary incident during Moore's retreat at Cacabellos, rifleman Tom Plunkett picked off and killed a French general at 400 yards. Some say more. Thanks to the defenders' skill and the retreat's urgency, the British stayed just ahead of the French on New Year's Eve. Napoleon received disturbing news from Paris, rumors of conspiracy and signs that Austria was preparing for war again. He immediately left Spain, taking many of his best troops, and left Marshal Soult in charge of finishing off the British. The pursuit continued on January 11, 1809. Sir John Moore's battered army reached Coruña. For Moore's exhausted men, The Spanish poured men supplies, rest, and the hope of rescue. But few British ships were there to meet them on the 11th. Fortunately, they were able to blow up the bridges behind them, delaying Marshal Soult 3 days later, on January 14th. Royal Navy transports finally arrived, and more began embarking, his cavalry and artillery. But the next day, Soult's army appeared on the hills south of Coruña, taking the heights of Pecos Guado, where he placed his main battery. Both armies had about 16,000 men. The French had 4 dragoon regiments, but British cavalry had already boarded ship, the broken train of walls, hedges, and olive groves made the battlefield unsuitable for cavalry. Soult planned to attack the British right flank and trap Moore's army against the sea dot at 2 p.m. French artillery opened fire. Then, Mermet's infantry advanced, supported by La Hasse's dragoons on the left. Moore, and sure where the Soult would attack, had just ordered Paget's division to begin embarking. Now, he rushed to cancel that order and instead ordered Paget to reinforce his exposed right flank. While Fraser's division occupied the Santa Margarita Heights, the French advanced through hedges and over walls, trading heavy fire with the British. Then the British counterattacked. The 42nd Highlanders and 50th Foot charged into the village of Elviga, driving the French out. But in the confusion, they too were soon pushed back. Sir John Moore, near the front lines urging on his men, was struck in the shoulder by a cannonball. He remained conscious, but the wound was clearly mortal. He was carried back to the city. Soult sent in Merle's division to support the assault on Elviga. General John Hope, his Scotsman, took over command from the dying Moore and dispatched 2 more battalions to hold the line. Meanwhile, Pettit's division, spearheaded by the 95th Rifles, advanced on the British right. The terrain was so rough the French dragoons had to dismount and fight on foot, but were gradually pushed back. Pettit's advance threatened the flank of Mermet's attack, forcing the French to withdraw. Delaborde's assault on the British left captured part of the village of Pieronga, but became bogged down in intense fighting. Round 6 p.m., as darkness fell, firing ceased across the battlefield. Word that the British line had held reached Moore shortly before he died down. 8 p.m. in Coruña. That night, the British lit campfires and sent out pickets, then quietly withdrew to the port to begin the final evacuation. The next morning, the French found their enemy gone, but they were too late to seize the advantage. It wasn't until noon that they managed to bring up 6 guns to fire down on the bay. By then, most of the British had already embarked. In the rush to leave, a few transports ran aground and 2 were set on fire, but overall losses were light. A small Spanish garrison held Coruña, waiting until the British fleet was safely at sea before surrendering. Was Moore's retreat to Coruña a British disaster or a miraculous escape? Historians still debate it. Did he abandon Spain in its hour of need, or draw Napoleon's main force away buying time for others? Either way, it was the only British army in the field to survive, and it would return to fight another day. Meanwhile, Napoleon now faced the prospect of a long, grinding war in the Iberian Peninsula, and a renewed conflict with Austria at 2 fronts. War that would test his empire like never before. Napoleon had blundered in Spain, but it would be a year before the true scale of his mistake became clear. Later, he would admit, "I embarked on that affair very badly. I admit it. The immorality was too obvious. The injustice too cynical, the whole thing too ugly still." Napoleon's invasion of Spain seemed like an easy victory, but it turned into a brutal quagmire of resistance that shook the foundations of his empire. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and subscribe for more captivating stories from history.